Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure I'm up. I'm seeing green here. Okay, it's gone to yellow on me. Good. Alright, so I am seeing green. Good. Green Party of Santa Clara say I always see green. Good for you. Good for you. At least once each show. I try to make a habit of it because I want to keep my mind focused up. In many respects, it is the audience that makes the show. Because if you didn't have an audience, you would not have a show. That's what it boils down to. That's the first part. Second part. Laura Steiner is going to be here on Wednesday. The story that I gave about resistance at the DNC, she was the person who wrote that story. She was the person who was integral to that particular resistance taking place. She will be here at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. That should be an amazing show. She's fucking awesome. I always say that woman is a pit bull. But that being said, I want to hop across the pond. I feel like my talents of being the defense attorney in this case are best needed across the pond. And what I mean by that is not a defense attorney for Russia, but a defense attorney for you, Britain. I'm being your defense attorney. Your government is positioning you in a peculiar way, and there needs to be scrutiny in the way that your government is going about this. Now, Jeremy Corbyn has held this shape remarkably well in the face of such a thing. Good for Jeremy Corbyn. But I, too, am going to lend my voice to this. Because the fact is, whether Russia did this or not, you need to be very transparent and very clear about what you guys are doing, because this is a big fucking deal. This is somewhat of an international incident with a NATO country. So you can understand this is problematic, meaning if you're going to accuse them of something, you need to make damn well sure that what they're being accused of is actually what they did. Now, Theresa May has shown you no evidence. They've recently said they're going to raise the evidence to the international community, and good. Very good. But do you see, it's somewhat strange to say they're likely the culprit when you haven't had an actual investigation. And the only word that people are taking for this is yours. That's not enough. That's not enough. You've pointed the finger at another country. And you've said that country was responsible for something, while at the same time denying that country the capacity to look at the evidence that you're using to accuse them of. It is also somewhat sketchy for you to give an accusation and then immediately pivot to consequences. In the same way that Donald Trump comes up and says, oh, hey, there's a Syrian attack. We now need to attack Syria because there's a Syrian attack. Wait a minute, are you going to have an investigation to see if Syria was the culprit? No, we've decided that they were the culprit and we've moved on from that part. The immediate pivot, without necessarily giving people or investigators time to actually figure out what took place. You find out in 2018, Mathis comes out saying, yeah, we have no evidence that Syria did that. Yeah, but you did the strike, even though you didn't have evidence of it. They use these things as pretexts for larger issues. A country wants to do X. They understand that the public itself is not going to be behind them doing X, so they create a pretext which would allow X to be a likely or even a possible scenario. I am not saying, by the way, that Theresa May did this, so don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying Russia did this. I have no idea, but that's kind of my point. I have no idea. And I do know that governments lie. I do know that governments create pretexts for other things. So I do know that governments do false flags. I do know that other foreign actors can do things to, again, create certain situations in other governments. And to make this point, to bring this point home a little bit, it is hard for a regular person to get into the headspace of some of the foreign actors that are at play, meaning some of the maniacs that are at play in your country and abroad. In the same way that we have maniacs here that are in the CIA, you have your own group of maniacs in their own alphabet agency that think up insane and maniac things. What is the headspace of the person that allowed the Gulf attack and that made that up in order to allow the pretext for Vietnam? They understood that they were engaging this country into a larger conflict, into a war. They did it nonetheless. What is the headspace of the person who comes up with the Spanish-American War when they're propping this thing up in the media in order to get the United States to attack another country? What is the headspace of that individual? Let's closer to home. What is the headspace of the person who's saying we're going into Libya for humanitarian reasons, knowing full well that we are paying terrorists in that country in addition to using air power to drop bombs and kill people? Gaddafi was sodomized with a machete. Whatever you want to think of Gaddafi, did we have anything to do with that country? Meaning, should we be bombing the shit out of that country? And by the way, it wasn't for humanitarian reasons. But I'm asking, what is the headspace of the person who thinks that stuff up? What about the headspace of the person who wants to paint a plane to make it look like Iraq is shooting at one of our planes to give us a pretext for Iraq? What is the headspace of the person who's saying weapons of mass destruction, or for that matter, of talking about blowing up or killing a bunch of Floridians or Cubans in order to create real or simulated? So we got to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the fact is, they did put on the table killing Floridians in order to go into Cuba. I'm asking you, from your station, it is difficult to get into the headspace of people who are willing to do these things, who are willing to kill and maim in order to affect their particular agenda. We have different filters. I'm saying you need to leave your filter on the table, because that is not the same filter that they use to look at the world. This is idea of fairness and goodwill and everything else. This boils down to what do they want to do and how do they get across what they want to do. There's a mass hysteria in the United States with the Russia nonsense. They've screamed that Trump has something to do with Russia. And in screaming that Trump has something to do with Russia, they've had a bogus investigation. Now, all of this was conjured up by the Clinton campaign, meaning the same people that got Clinton off were the same people that got Donald Trump on for the Russia investigation. After 2 years, what they ended up with were Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which took place after the election. That's what they're talking about. And nothing in the ads is any different than what they were saying in the campaigns. That's what they're talking about that ginned up all of this Russia hysteria in the United States. You have people, broadcasters, with a straight face saying that Nunes is a Russian agent because Nunes came out with his memo attacking the Russian narrative. Like, this is the hysteria that we're dealing with in the United States, and the best they came up with Facebook and Twitter ads. Now, you can understand me being skeptical of what's taking place in the UK when they do the exact same thing. Russia did something. Okay, Russia did it again. Now, in Russia doing something, we're not going to provide you evidence for it. We're going to say they're likely the culprit, but immediately move the very next day to not just likely, to that they are the culprit. And we're functioning as if they've already done it, that we've convicted them of some kind of crime. We don't give them the evidence. We haven't given anybody any evidence, but that's what we're doing. So forgive my skepticism on this. That's the first point. And this has gone magnificently long because that wasn't the thing that we originally wanted to talk about. I was just trying to nail home why I look at this in this particular way. Why I don't just take the government's word for it. Governments have a tendency to lie, especially when they're trying to advance a particular agenda. And while it may not be Britain's government, it could be. It could be the United States. It could be somebody else. Let's stop pretending that the only people who have this particular chemical, if it's this chemical in the first place, because we don't even know that, it's Russia. Let's stop pretending that it's Russia. And to make this point home, right here. So, Russia apparently got rid of its stockpile of chemical weapons. OPCW Director General commends major milestone as Russia completes destruction of chemical weapons stockpile under OPCW verification. Now, Russia is a government like any other government, so I don't believe this at all. I don't believe this at all. BS. Governments, I don't believe, destroy their armaments and destroy their stockpiles like this. In the same way that if you got rid of nuclear weapons, I don't believe that those countries would have completely got rid of their nuclear weapons. It's their ace in the hole. It's their contingency plan. They keep this stuff for contingencies. So yes, they might have gotten rid of stockpile that people know about. Do they likely have a stockpile that people don't know about? Yes. But at least overtly, from the international community's standpoint, based on standards that we've set, apparently, Russia has got rid of their stockpile. Britain has not. The United States has not. Let's keep going. So, second story. Britain comes clean on nerve gas. Oh, what is this? May 1997. Britain largely disposed of its offensive chemical warfare arsenal, poison gas, including nerve gas, in 1960, the government disclosed yesterday. But until 1978, small amounts of nerve gas were made at Nantchuck in Cornwall, where it housed the Process Research Division of Porton Down Chemical Defense Establishment, and Britain nearly rearmed with chemical weapons in 1963. Although the Nantchuck site was, like one site remaining in Porton Down in Worcester, meant to help develop defenses against chemical attacks. Some of the work done there used by the United States to develop offensive chemical weapons as late as 1964. The chemical weapons made there include nerve gas, sarin, and VX. The 240-page report is Britain's declaration to the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as now required by the International Chemical Weapons Convention, which came into force April 29th, and to which Britain is a signatory. So Britain still has chemical weapons, even though Britain is a signatory to this particular thing. So now Britain maintains a small, quote-unquote, small-scale facility at Porton Down run by the Defense Evaluation and Research Agency, which has allowed up to 1 ton of chemical agents to help develop defenses under the treaty, although the Ministry of Defense said that a very small quantity was also kept at the Royal Military College of Science in Oxfordshire. All right, let's keep going. The past Porton Down can't hide. Uh-oh. As an inquest reopens into the death of a young airman 51 years ago, Rob Evans reveals the secret of Britain nerve gas tests. Tucked away in the 7,000-acre beautiful Wiltshire countryside lies Britain's most infamous scientific establishments. Porton Down, founded in 1916, is the oldest chemical warfare research installation in the world. The tight secrecy which has surrounded the establishment for decades has fed the growth of all sorts of myths and rumors about experiments. One Whitehall official once remarked that Porton Down had an image of a sinister and nefarious establishment. The Porton experiments on humans have attracted a good deal of criticism. It is, for example, alleged that human guinea pigs drawn from the armed forces, are supposedly all volunteers, were duped into taking part in these tests. There are still concerns that the tests have damaged long-term health of human subjects. This week, the work has been thrown into the spotlight again. An inquest reopened into the death of May 1953 of a young airman, Ronald Madison. He died after liquid nerve gas agent was dripped into his arm by Porton scientists in an experiment. The original inquest decided that the death was accidental, but this new inquest will examine fresh evidence and decide if the verdict should stand. From 1945 to 1989, Porton exposed more than 3,400 human guinea pigs to nerve gas. It seems probable that Porton tested more human subjects with nerve gas for the longest period of time than any other establishment in the world. The two other nations have admitted testing nerve gas on humans. The American military exposed 1,100 soldiers between 1945 and 1975, and Canada tested a small number before 1968. Other countries include France, Soviet Union, and Iraq are also likely to expose human, but very little is known about their tests. All right, let's keep going. It gets worse. Millions were in germ war tests. Much of Britain was exposed to bacteria sprayed in secret trials. The Ministry of Defense turned large parts of the country into a giant laboratory to conduct a series of secret germ warfare tests on the public. A government report just released provided for the first time a comprehensive official history of Britain's biological weapons trial between 1940 and 1979. Many of the tests involved releasing potentially dangerous chemicals and microorganisms over vast swaths of the population without the public being told. This includes, by the way, into the London Tube. The tests carried out by the government scientists at Porton Down were designed to help the Ministry of Defense assess Britain's vulnerability if Russians were to have released clouds of deadly germs over the country. In most cases, the trial did not use biological weapons, but alternatives which scientists believe would mimic germ warfare, which the Ministry of Defense claimed were harmless. Well, they claimed were harmless, but they were held in secret, so you wouldn't know either way. But families in certain cases of the country who had children with birth defects are demanding a public inquiry. One chapter of this report, the fluorescent particle trials, reveal how between 1955 and 1963, planes flew from northeast England to the tip of Cornwall along the south and west coasts, dropping large amounts of zinc cadmium sulfide on the population. The chemical drifted miles inland is fluorescence, allowing the spread to be monitored. In another trial using zinc cadmium sulfide, a generator was towed onto a road near Frome and Somerset, where it spewed the chemical for an hour. While the government has insisted the chemical is safe, cadmium is recognized as a cause of lung cancer during the Second World War. Is considered by allies a chemical weapon. Let's see. They're going through the different reports that were taking place. Part of these reports also included the London Tube. I'm trying to find that part. But my point here is Britain has experimented with this stuff. Like, and experimented on his own population with this stuff. And don't get me wrong, America has done the same thing. But I'm just trying to make this point. Britain is acting like it is a dandelion, that they were just accosted, that no one else in the world other than Russia has access to this particular thing, and that somehow they've been able to typecast it and point the finger to Russia. And I'm saying, until they show you something, you shouldn't believe them. Not to mention, they themselves have experimented with this stuff. They themselves have experimented with their own population with this stuff. I would be very suspicious of what the government is saying here. And it's, again, not saying Russia didn't do it. I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying they don't know because they haven't had an investigation. And I'm saying not having an investigation. The investigation wasn't the point. The point was the blame. The point was to be able to pivot from immediately blaming them into this idea of consequences. Your government has worked with the nerve agents. Your government has experimented on the population with nerve agents. Your government does have the capacity to carry out an attack like this. And it would be very easy to point the finger to Russia, seeing as everyone is in this Russia hysteria. Britain has to be considered one of the potential culprits of this. I'm sorry, they do. They do. If the same thing happened in the States, I would have said the same thing. All I'm saying is you need to have an investigation to figure out what took place. And Britain itself cannot be the sole discretion in regards to what's true and what's not true. And each government needs to be held with a certain amount of skepticism. I would say that regardless of the government, I don't care what government it is, governments lie. Especially when there's some incentive for them to lie. You have a hysteria that's taking place in the United States. You seem to have these NATO countries that have been building up their weapons. They've been putting these weapons on the border of Russia. You have a war right now in the Ukraine where you have neo-Nazis being supported by Western powers in the United States. And you have Russia trying to carve out a space to keep those NATO nations further off of his border. I'm saying you have what's ginning up as this Cold War, and something seems to be pushing these countries in a particular direction. You have the hysteria that's taking place in the United States right now. You have a proxy war going on in Syria right now, where the United States, Britain, and France are illegally carrying on operations in Syria, and Syria itself is aligned with the UK and with Iran, and with, Syria is aligned with with Russia and Iran. That's not even a proxy war at that point. That's somewhat of a direct conflict. I'm saying be very careful. There is some element that seems to be looking for a new Cold War, and it seems to be ginning up this stuff in the United States, which, let's be honest, does not have the brightest population with regards to politics, and doing the same thing in the UK. Be very skeptical. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. How many British citizens gave their lives for that nonsense? Be skeptical. They're stepping you into a war. Now, whether they're doing this purely for this idea of obfuscation into the problems that are affecting its own personal government and this kind of populist revolt like what's taking place in the United States, or whether this is done for reasons like for Brexit. We don't have an answer for Brexit. Hey, Theresa May, what's the solution to the Irish border issue? And be specific. Be specific. My point is, I don't know why the push is taking place, but certainly you can see the hysteria in the United States. You can see the hysteria in the UK. All of these countries have all of a sudden just started blaming Russia. And they're blaming Russia for stuff that they themselves do. This massive level of hypocrisy that takes place in their world affairs. Just be skeptical. Just don't take what they're saying as the word of God. Be skeptical. Don't allow the hysteria to take over you in the same way that it's taken over people in the States. When I'm saying I'm the defense attorney in this case, I'm talking about for Britain and the UK itself, for the rule of law, for good goddamn common sense, to not escalate when you don't even know what is taking place. Be skeptical of your government. Be skeptical of your government. There is a video that I want to show, but I probably should show this in another one. But I'll show this here and I'll show it again in another one when I just do it by itself. This is reporter from the UK. I mean from what is his name? What is his name? What is his name? Yeah, John Pilger. I like John Pilger. So this is Pilger talking to one of the reporters on RT. Listen to what he says, because what he's saying makes a lot of sense.
Filmmaker, great to have you on the programme, sir. We've heard the UK police make a statement. The investigation's still very much active. It's going to take some time. No suspects named as of yet. British politicians, they've placed the blame squarely on Russia there, haven't they? No questions asked. Do you think this has been preemptive?
Well, no. I mean, you have to stand back from all of this. This is a carefully constructed drama as part of the propaganda campaign that has been building now for several years in order to justify the actions of NATO, Britain, the United States towards Russia. That's a fact. Russia is ringed by missiles. It has NATO right up on its western border. This is unprecedented since the Second World War. Most people in Britain, most people in the United States don't understand these dangers, the dangers of this propaganda. Now,
and he's right by this, by the way. I mean, you have lefty networks, Cenk Uygur, who's apparently deeply progressive, saying Nerf bombs, that the bombs that were dropped in Syria, when they launched those missile strikes in Syria, that it wasn't, it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that big of a deal. They've killed Syrians. The United States is literally in a war with Russia on the other side of that particular conflict. This is immensely problematic. This is worrying and terrifying. You have NATO countries building up their armaments, meaning NATO countries have started to spend more money on weapons. Those weapons have been ringed around Russia. What he's saying, that missile ring, he's right. NATO has gotten closer and closer to the Russian border despite promises by the United States itself, by U.S. presidents, that they would not expand NATO. They did it nonetheless, and they continue to expand it. Donald Trump, who's supposedly a Vladimir Putin puppet, is sending weapons and munitions to neo-Nazis in the Ukraine. Those neo-Nazis are going to use those weapons that Donald Trump sent in order to attack and kill Russians. Understand what is taking place. This is terrifying. This is absolutely terrifying. Let him finish.
This drama about whether or not Serge Skripal was poisoned by Novichok, for one thing, it's up to the British government to supply evidence that even the most basic prima facie evidence, prima facie case that Russia was in any way responsible for this. Russia's nerve gas program, its Novichok, active Novichok program, was verified as destroyed in September 2013 by the United Nations watchdog. Unlike the United States, that is still to be destroyed. Porton Down, a few miles from where Skripal and his daughter were found, has a long and sinister record with nerve gas and chemical weapons. In 2015, The Independent in Britain disclosed that Porton Down was behind the experimentation. The government had experimented on British citizens with nerve gas agents, including on the London Tube. Going back to 1942, the British government had to pay compensation, had to decontaminate Gurlad Island, which it contaminated. The whole role of Porton Down has been integral to the Cold War apparatus of this, and I'm only stating that. I'm only stating that is that there is no evidence, and this is so dangerous with Russia being effectively pushed into a corner with these accusations. It's part of a propaganda campaign. I can tell you that. I'm a journalist who spent almost all my career working in the mainstream in Britain. This is a propaganda campaign promoted specifically in the media and in the government.
If I can just interrupt, Mr. Pilger, I want to get as many questions as I can. And I mean, if we can get back to the sort of question at hand here, I mean, Prime Minister Theresa May said it's highly likely that Russia was involved in some way in this, certainly some strong circumstantial evidence at least. I mean, are you ruling that out entirely as a possibility, any Russian involvement in this?
Well, there's no evidence that Russia is highly likely. Novichok, we don't even know if the Novichok program even existed.
Notice what he's doing, by the way. He's just asking questions. It's journalists. Your government says something. The journalist is supposed to be the watchdog. It's not supposed to be stenographers. Meaning the government comes out with a story. Yes, you report the story, but you also investigate the story. Meaning you need to interrogate what the government is saying, not necessarily just take it and run with it as if it's the word of God. Governments lie. Certainly the media understands that governments lie. They have to at this point. Are they incompetent or are they just part of the scenario? Like, I can never tell which one it is. But this idea that these guys are stenographers, and as if the government has never told a lie in his life, and anything that the government says is the word of God, so I need to report exactly what the government is saying in the exact way the government is saying, uncritically and unskeptically. Come on. Come on. Let's be adults. Let's be adults. We understand that governments tell falsehoods. You can show it case after case after case after case. This is a big fucking deal. You should be a hell of a lot more skeptical of something that is a big fucking deal like this. They're talking about officially enacting a new Cold War. And I'm saying we're already there, whether they talk about it officially or not. But there's something about the officiality of it that makes it worse. They're creating pretexts. That's exactly what this is. They're creating pretexts for something else. Be very skeptical. That's all I'm saying. Be very skeptical. Let's let him finish.
Russia's request for a sample of this nerve agent has been turned down. The British police have made no commentary on this. This is extraordinary. So you have an attempted murder, you have a crime scene, and you have no evidence. But you have, and neither do you have a motive. Why on earth would Russia, on the eve of an election and on the eve of staging the World Football Cup, want to destroy, if you like, its international name with such a crime? It makes sense, but there's plenty of motive on the other side. because, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is part of a carefully constructed drama in which the media plays a role, the government plays a role, both sides of the House of Commons play a role, unfortunately. And it's Iraq, if you go back to 2003.
Here's the thing. Yes, both sides of the House of Commons have to play along because they don't have a choice but to play along. Jeremy Corbyn, yes, he can hold his shape to some degree, but he does have to bend according to the events. Meaning, if he took a position that, if he took this position, the Folger's taking of all of this stuff is a lie, the government is making this shit up, they need to provide evidence. Yeah, Corbyn is taking a position that, yes, the government needs to provide evidence. But ultimately, he can't necessarily stand as a full-on lefty in this. He's going to get caught up in a tidal wave. Part of the way that the right is used to hit the left on these type of issues is because the public gets swept up in this kind of hysteria, and they like somebody being tough as opposed to somebody being rational, if that makes sense. So, to some degree, everybody gets deformed by this. Now, Corbyn has held this shape better than anybody else, making this point of, yeah, we need to see evidence, we need to raise this, it needs to be a transparent process, and also you guys have taken massive amounts of money for these Russian oligarchs. Not only did he hit him on this, he also asked for evidence on this. Both of those things, I like both. It's aggressive in multiple ways. I like it. But what he's saying here is right. They need to provide evidence. This comes across as weapons of mass destruction, and they were doing weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, despite the hysteria that the media was pushing, and despite the hysteria that the government itself was pushing at the time. Let him finish, because he's going to make his point.
That carefully constructed drama saw an invasion of Iraq and the death of up to 1 million people. And we know that was based entirely on propaganda, deception, and lies. That, at the very least, should make us skeptical of May's theatrics.
Exactly. Exactly. And just ask the second question that he made. What would be the motivation for Russia to do this? What is their motivation? Like, they're about to have an election and somebody says, yeah, let's get rid of that spy. Let's knock that guy off and knock his daughter off. Let's do that. And make sure we leave evidence so they can point it back and trace it to us. Because we don't have anybody in Russia that's really good at doing the spycraft stuff. Come on. Are you shitting me? I just have a hard time believing the stuff that these guys are saying. So you had these Russian hackers who are so good at hacking and they can dip and dodge into the computer systems and they can break into all these files. But they were careful to leave Russian lettering. They were careful to leave Russian lettering. Meaning, there was information on the computer that they say, hey, Russia did it. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute. They were this good where they were getting into the computers and they just so happened to leave Russian lettering behind? Oh no, they don't sound right. They don't sound right. Veteran intelligence professionals say it wasn't a leak, or it wasn't a hack, it was a leak, saying that the speeds that they used to download the information were more commensurate with a flash drive, not something that's taken across the wire. They said it was somewhat physically impossible. They said if the system itself was manipulated to look like Russian involvement. We know that the CIA has the capacity to dip and dodge into other people's systems and make it look like leaving traces like it's from other countries. We know that. That was one of the things that was released and from WikiLeaks. Now, if the CIA has that capacity, wouldn't you think other state actors would also have that capacity? I'm trying to make this point that what they're using to denote a particular country, this evidence sometimes can be manufactured to make it look like a particular country. All of this stuff, to some degree, is a crapshoot. You can't necessarily take everything that these people are saying as right. Oftentimes, they have motives and things that they want to accomplish, and they use pretext and deception in order to get the public in that particular disposition. The public needs to be more skeptical. The public needs to be far more skeptical. The moment that you find once or twice in history where they've done this, then you can't rule it off the table. And yet, that's what media does. Media continuously rules it off the table. He's asking a really basic question. What would be Russia's motivation for this? Why would they do it? Do they have a motivation? Does the UK government have a motivation? Does the American government have a motivation? Does the NATO powers have somewhat of a motivation? Meaning, it seems like a denigration of Russia. in this country, it definitely seems like a denigration of Russia. I've literally seen people compare Russian to rats and roaches. That's what we are. That's literally what we are. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, something in the UK. And we have another culprit, Russia. So Russia has been in charge or responsible for environmentalists being pissed off about the environment and the damage being done to the environment, this green energy thing, having dapple protesters getting their head beat in by police trying to protect their land. They were upset about that, apparently. Russians got those guys upset about that. Russia got African Americans upset for being shot in the face by cops and not having any consequences for those people being shot in the face. That was also Russia's responsibility. Russia also apparently had something to do with Bernie Sanders supporters being really pissed off that they were being cheated by the Clinton camp. But that was also Russia. It had nothing to do with them being cheated by the Clinton camp. Do you understand the ridiculousness of this? They've talked about Russia in the infrastructure. They've talked about Russia irresponsible for gun ownership, like people being pissed off about guns. And now Britain comes up, and Russia is now responsible for killing a spy, a double agent. Britain has worked with chemical weapons. We know that. Britain has experimented with chemical weapons on its own population. We know that. Britain has not gotten rid of its chemical stockpile. We know that. Britain has the capacity to carry out something like this. Yes, they do. We know that. If something like this was carried out by something other than Russia, how would the media carry the story? The media would carry the story, whatever the government says the story is. Meaning, even if Britain did this, the media would carry the story that the government says that Russia did it. In the same way that if the United States carried out that attack on the Cubans, meaning killing those Cubans in order to get a pretext for the Cuban War, the media would have carried it in the exact same way, saying, oh my God, the Castro attacked these people. They blew up this boat. We need to find a reason to go into Cuba. I'm making this point to you that the media carries the narrative, whatever the narrative or whatever the government says the narrative is. They can't necessarily be a source of valid information from the standpoint that they're just carrying the narrative of whatever the government says it is. They're not interrogating the story. They're not looking for hard evidence. Whatever Theresa May says is what the media is going along with. That's not the same thing as information. That's not the same thing as evidence. And that's damn sure not getting to the bottom of anything. Be careful of the pivot. Be careful of the pivot. I'll leave it at that. This is going way too long. But oh wow, we have people here. All right, let's see. Putin has been stabilizing influence on the world affairs, not saying he isn't a criminal, but during Yeltsin, it was a miracle that nukes didn't start flying because of mismanagement of stockpile. Yeah, Yeltsin was incompetent. I mean, part of the reason that they wanted Yeltsin in that position was because Yeltsin was incompetent. He was the Western's pick. They had Russia. And this is what I mean by this. This is like majorly hypocritical. A lot of people don't know this, but the United States intruded into the Russian political affairs during the Yeltsin campaign. They helped get Yeltsin elected. They helped get Yeltsin elected because they figured Yeltsin was closer to the West and Yeltsin was incompetent. That's the reason they wanted Yeltsin in that spot. We literally put on a publicity campaign, like we ran a campaign in that country to get Yeltsin elected. We are complaining about Facebook and Twitter ads. We directly engaged in Russian affairs. Like, understand what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to get across. Do you realize hundreds of thousands of Russians died from this transition from the Soviet Union to Russia, like when they broke up those states? And we made certain agreements and deals with the Soviet Union as they broke up. Part of those deals, we won't expand NATO. We will not expand NATO. The moment that Bush left office, Clinton said, thank you very much. And I am not bound by the things that the other president said. And he continued to expand NATO to the borders of Russia. They lost. Hundreds of thousands of people died in that transition. And a few Americans got magnificently wealthy. Again, we made certain promises and we broke those promises. One of those promises was, you won't take advantage of us and you won't get magnificently wealthy off of us. And that's exactly what a few Americans did. Those people went to jail, if I'm not mistaken. But they got filthy rich off of the misery of Russians. I'm trying to get across this thing that what the United States is saying is patently absurd in comparison to what the United States has done and how it has instigated itself into Russian affairs. That's what I'm telling you. All of this hysteria is insane. Like, it takes, you would have to have a political context of like 6 months. It's like your world exists only in 6 months. It's like fucking insane. Jeremy Chase, I'm just saying, look at the irony. The woman complaining about Russian interference is married to the person who rigged the Russian elections. That's awesome. More recent U.S. interfered in the Ukraine Feminist News Network. Yeah. Neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis. Supporting neo-fucking Nazis. Because they're fighting Russians. Like, understand what I mean by this. Ukraine is on the Russian border. Now, Ukraine was close to Russia at that point. They had a government that was, you know, more pro-Russian. At some point, you had separatists or people who didn't necessarily like that alignment, and they were emboldened by the West. There's an awesome clip of Nigel Farage taking the EU to task over their involvement in what took place, that civil war in the Ukraine. Do you understand that if Ukraine became a NATO ally, you're literally talking almost, for the most part, a war? You have... Look, I guess I feel like I take the underdog position in this because I feel like they're blaming this other country in this way that's not necessarily fair. And when I say the other country, I'm not talking about Vladimir Putin. Russia is a big fucking country. It is more than just one person. If you're talking about any kind of conflict, you're talking about human beings being hurt, human beings being killed. Even if you're talking about positioning yourself into a Cold War, you're talking about putting yourself on the brink of disaster. Talking about putting yourself on the brink of disaster. You should be extremely clear about what's taking place before you bring us closer to disaster. Yeah. Thank you for talking about the Ukraine. It's horrible what the United States is supporting there, including Trump now sending tanks over to him. The media is ignoring this intentionally. Yeah, and by the way, we were willing to go to a nuclear war over Cuba. Understand what I am saying and understand the ridiculousness of the United States' position here. And for that matter, the UK's position. We were willing to go to war over Cuba. If Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba, we were literally willing to go to war. They had missiles in Cuba, by the way. And the United States was going to do an airstrike on Cuba. We had a blockade. We had Kennedy, who was decent. He had political savvy about him. But understand, all of that started to some degree because we were trying to kill Castro, and Castro was looking for a way to protect himself. Those missiles would have hit the United States. There was no way a bombing raid would have gotten all those missiles. And the Soviet Union had already said, strike if the United States strikes. They were willing to have a nuclear war. You should listen to the tapes where Kennedy is having this conversation with these guys in the room about what they're going to do. The military was perfectly okay with the United States losing part of the country, with the assumption that we can wipe them out even though they may take our eastern seaboard. That's the calculus that they were making during that time. It just so happened you had John F. Kennedy's political acumen to get us out of that situation without a lot of people losing their lives. Why is it insane? Seeing as we were willing to go to a nuclear war over Cuba. And if you're looking at the world through the same lens, meaning you're not monkeying around with how you view and weigh things because the other countries are different. If you're looking at this from the standpoint of just fairness, you put your stake in the ground fairness. And you say, well, wait a minute. If we were willing to have a nuclear war over Cuba, how are we supporting neo-Nazis in the Ukraine when Russia is just trying to secure its borders? We were trying to do the exact same thing in Cuba. If Russia put a force on the border of Mexico, what would the United States' response be? What? We have troops on their borders. If the situation was reversed, what would the response of the United States be? It's like, come on. Feminist Network. Not to forget the plane that crashed in Ukraine that held EU's top signs on the way to a climate conference. Fan of fanatics. Jamal, the United States is willing to go to war with anyone if the government believes it can profit from it. Anyone. With one caveat. Only if it's... Look, I don't think they're willing to do a nuclear power nation. I think they are stupid enough to inch us into a Cold War that could topple and fall into nuclear power, into a nuclear war. But a nuclear war is different. Like, it's... Part of the reason that they haven't attacked North Korea is because they understand that North Korea would immediately launch a strike on Japan and South Korea. Under normal circumstances, if North Korea was just in a little island in the ocean that nothing was nearby, they would have attacked and blown that shit off the map. Yes, we are willing to attack. We have a bunch of maniacs who are at the helm. They're immoral maniacs. And yes, they're willing to attack if they think that there's some kind of profit out of it. Providing that you can't bite them back. The problem with Russia is they can bite back. They can bite back. And by the way, it wouldn't just be Russia. It would be Russia, it would be China, it would be Iran, it would be Syria. It would be a list of countries that would be against us. So, Alexander Platz, you're correct. There's no profit in nuclear war. There's profit in Cold War and proxy wars. Yeah. Yeah. The so-called Orange Revolution of Ukraine is just a coup. Yeah, that's all it was. I mean, we like it as a revolution because for us it's, oh, we like the person who's going to take office. So yeah, it's a revolution. If it's somebody we don't like, oh, that's a coup. We don't support coups. The language is purely just related to who we like or who we dislike. The language doesn't mean anything. I mean, yes, it has meanings, but the meaning is somewhat Orwellian. Like, they use the language purely with the intent of, do I like this person or don't I like this person? If I like this person, it doesn't really matter what they do. They can kill their citizens. They can chop off heads. They can crucify. They can put women in boxes. They can do whatever they want. We're their allies, so it's perfectly okay. If we dislike them, then, oh, anything they do is bad and horrible and disgusting. Oh, they're nasty people. They're regimes. They're not governments at that point. Yeah. Jelly Donut. In 2014, Ukrainians prefer revolution of dignity. A revolution of dignity. Oh, fucking war. Yeah. Yeah. A coup in favor of actual Nazis. Think about that. Thing is, though, we've supported Nazis, or we've supported, well, we brought a bunch of Nazis over after the war as scientists. But we've supported fascist regimes. I mean, look, the only thing we care about is, are you going to play ball with us or not? We don't care about the other stuff. Are you going to play ball or not? We're not going to get into your internal affairs if you're willing to play ball with us. You can do whatever you want. We don't care. If you're not going to play ball with us, then we're going to care a great deal, and we're going to talk bad about you. We may try to get you killed. For people, they should look at Economic Hitman. They should read books like that. When you're looking at books like this, or Smugly Bogues, Wars Racket, you get into this idea of the maniacs, the people who look at these war plans and look at these things, like people who knock off government leaders because they want access to those resources. Do you understand that the Iranian thing, the United States and Britain helped topple the Iranian government? Now, they toppled the Iranian government because they wanted a higher stake in their oil. They wanted their oil revenue to actually go towards the people of that particular country. Isn't that fucking shocking? Use the revenue and the resources for your country, for the people of that country. Britain didn't like that. Britain didn't like that. And worked with the United States to form a coup, using the CIA to create a coup and get that guy out. They had a secular government. Secular, progressive government. We toppled it. We put in a brutal dictator and protected that brutal dictator. Carter, the guy who lefties love right now, Carter said this guy was a great guy. I mean, granted, that was before he was just overturned a few years later. But the guy was a brutal dictator that we installed into that country because he was willing to play ball with us. Just saying. Just saying. All one has to do is look at the history of Central America. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Absolutely, Garden. Tabitha Enriquez, in mainstream media, hit flicks. Don't forget, America exceptionalism is the one that integrated, is the one ingredient that makes everything we do justified. Yeah, and the media looks at it from that lens of we're doing the right thing. It's like a sacrosanct. If we're doing it, by definition, it's the right thing. Like, that's the way the media looks at this stuff. It's fucking Orwellian. When Donald Trump fired off that missile, all of those people in media were like, oh, he's presidential today. He's a great man today. This is the thing that makes him a president. Firing off an illegal missile strike that killed multiple people. That's what makes him a great president. Red in Economics, good point, Garden. If you think Carter was so great, look at East Timor, Kenneth Notpick. Oh, it's not that I think Carter's great. I'm just making the point that Carter was backing up the fact that the United States put in a strongman dictator in that part of the world. Like, literally saying how great this guy was. This guy was a fucking brutal dictator. I mean, I'm trying to get this point. We look at the media, and the media only announces. Like, this idea of investigative journalists are few and far between. These guys are stenographers. They're like state media at this point. They don't have to call themselves state media, but they're, for all intents and purposes, state media. They recount the government line. It's somewhat Orwellian that they don't call themselves state media. Like, the BBC announces what it is. Russian television announces what it is. CNN should do the same thing. U.S. television. United States news. I always mention East Timor in connection with Vietnam. East Timor was Kissinger's baby, though. All the bombing and all, yeah. Fan fanatics. So many pundits came in their pants when Trump launched those missiles like a nice circle jerk in mainstream media. Did you see that shit? Yeah. Yeah, Brian Williams. I moved to Portree. I am blinded by the light of our weapons. Are you now? Are you now? How about you do your fucking job and say that this is an illegal missile strike? There's no barbarians at our gates. And what justification does Donald Trump, the president of the United States, have for doing this? Come on, blinded by the light of my weapons. Frosty Buckets. Jamal, what's your view on the Canadian whistleblower calling out Face Doodle and mainstream media trying to connect it to Russia? I haven't looked into it. I've seen a few reports on it, but I haven't fully depth into it. Yeah, I don't have a point of view on it yet. Once I look into it, I'll give a point of view. Carter turned into a good person after that, but was a bad president. Mr. Kashinda. Gianna Waters. Fireworks. Ironically, common sense laws regulating those. Censored. Jamal, someone censored me. Fred Edwards. Someone censored you? Who censored you, Fred? I don't know who censored you. Brian Williams loves himself. Yeah, that was amazing to watch. Brian Williams is like quoting poetry as we illegally fire missile strikes into another country. If you want to understand why Americans are so fucked up with regards to military, look at our media. Look at our media. Look at how they respond to the president firing off weapons. It was shameful. Love the stream yesterday. Saw it live. You and HB brothers from another mother. Grinning libertarian. Yeah, man. I enjoyed that conversation. I didn't realize we had that much in common. I gotta be honest. I did. Like, I watch Harbas's show every so often. I didn't realize that we agreed on this thing of war. Like, I don't want to be spending my time and money fucking around in other countries if we don't need to be spending our time and money fucking around in other countries. Like, I know we bump heads probably if we get into this idea of policy and everything else. But the point I'm making here is, when you're not paid to take a position, you can come to agreement. I would guarantee you that if HB and I were responsible for writing policy and like regulation, we disagree on a whole host of regulation, but I bet you we can come to some terms on some middle grounds between this stuff. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I can guarantee you that if there was something where we were coming together on this idea of corruption, we would come together hand in glove, no issue at all. Like, that's one of those things where you're talking about a left and right connection, where those things work in tandem with one another on issues that they agree on. If we're having this fight on war, if we're having this fight on the Russiagate nonsense, if we're having this fight on stopping us from invading and fighting other countries and spending $1 trillion in the military, we are on the same side. And on those things, we would fight like hell and probably be in full agreement with. When we get into the minutiae, maybe not. But fuck the minutiae. We have so much big shit we need to deal with. Let's focus on the things we agree with. Focus on things we agree with. Left, right, I don't care. Certainly, why on earth would you want to spending our blood and treasure on $1 trillion? Massive homeless population issue in California. We're spending $1 trillion on the military. Do you understand how sick that is? They raised the military budget by $80 billion. Nobody batted an eye. You have people, human beings in America, living on the fucking streets in California. And you're spending $1 billion, like $80 billion, murdering and killing people abroad. I mean, come on. The idea of priorities. Don't tell me about this American exceptionalism shit when you're spending this much money killing people while you have people living on the streets in your own country. It's insane. Absolutely insane. Ron Paul kicked ass. I saw that clip. There's absolutely no reason to ally with Hardbass or anybody in that crew. If we're talking about war, yes, there is. If we're talking about corruption, yes, there is. It depends on what we're talking about. We have a call. Let's see what we got. Hello. Who's the speaker? Who's speaking?
This is Brianna Wilson.
What's happening, Brianna? How's it going?
It's going pretty good, Jamal. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. What you want to talk about?
I want to talk about, for a minute if I can, codename Echelon and Porton Down.
Codename Echelon.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I haven't heard codename Echelon. I'll look it up, though.
Well,
so what is
codename Echelon is a, let me bring it up here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, codename Echelon is a secret government NSA program that the government has been denying for years and years, and it started in the 1960s as a NSA operation where they used satellites to spy on the USSR and the Eastern Bloc. And it was ran by the U.S. and Five Eyes, which is the U.S., Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and, of course, the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And the goal of that organization was to spy on the USSR via satellites, if you want to talk about weapons in space, to supposedly, spy on them for national security reasons.
Yeah.
But, of course, because these programs always do, they overreached, and it turned into corporate espionage.
Yeah.
Where they would spy on them to steal technology, to steal information from them, basically, to advance their military for corporate reasons and for military reasons.
Yeah.
And it was revealed that this organization was a real organization by Edward Snowden. So we know that it's real. We know that it really happened.
Right.
And I just want to point that out, that program exists. And the U.S. has been working with the U.K. for years and years and years to spy on Russia, to spy on other countries, communist countries, during the Cold War. And the Cold War never stopped. And we're still doing that. We're still doing the same thing for corporate reasons and for military reasons, to push for war and to push for whatever we want to accomplish for military reasons.
What do you think about the spy thing? Because I agree with you. I assume that the United States was... This is what terrifies me about this idea of weapons in space and everything else. Like, imagine a system where they have the capacity to spy. Because it's not just on them, by the way. It's also on us. Like, that spying network is not limited to Russia or the USSR. That's also on us. One of the things that would Snowden point out...
It's the NSA.
Yeah, it's the NSA.
They want, all these programs started for reasons of national security. If you look into Project Shamrock, which started in 1945 to spy on the Nazis. Of course, that wouldn't have, they wouldn't spy on civilians, right?
Of course they wouldn't. They would never do that. They would never do that.
Of course not. And then you go into Project Minaret, where they started spying on U.S. citizens, and they started passing information on regular criminals like drug dealers and people involved in
They're doing that now.
in the civil rights movement, and they would pass that information to police and intelligence organizations.
They're doing it now.
I'm sorry?
They're doing it now. Like,
NSA, exactly.
Yeah,
they're doing the same thing.
The FISA warrants and stuff like that. The thing I've been screaming about with the FISA warrants, 99.7% of those requests are approved. Like think about that. Like you're talking about the capacity to go into somebody's life and rip their life apart in order to spy. You have a cop or an agent who goes to a judge. That cop or agent wants to investigate you for something, for whatever it is. Now, the only person who's whispering in the judge's ear is the cop who wants to investigate you. 99.
Yeah, if you're interested in that, look up Project Minaret. That's actually what started the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, in the first place. Was these programs overreached and they started spying on these civilians, spying on
illegally spying, by the way.
MLK, anti-war activists, civil rights leaders, journalists, and even senators.
Illegal.
And so, Congress and the DOJ decided, that wiretapping was illegal, and it led to the creation of FISA, or FISA.
Yeah, but it's a fig leaf. I guess that's my point. It's a fig leaf. It's not really a judge. I mean, it's a judge, and calling it a judge is somewhat of a propaganda thing. It makes it as if that there's some kind of judgment that's associated with the process. 99.7% of those things are approved. It's just a rubber stamp. Call it what it is.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to...
Or when they keep these programs secret, like Codename Echelon, and they don't tell us that these programs exist. And the only reason we find out they exist is because of people like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and whistleblowers.
And those programs are illegal.
Who we may or may not murder.
Those programs are massively illegal. Like, when one of the things they're doing now, Benny kind of mentioned, is what is it, parallel reconstruction. So they are saying that they're using this stuff for terrorism, and then they're using it for domestic issues. And they would point cops where to go, and then they would allow them to reconstruct a trail in order to get the evidence. So they would say, show up at this particular place at this particular time, they go to that place that time, and then reconstruct the information itself in order to create a case against the person using secret information. Meaning they create a parallel information trail in order to convict somebody. But they're using secret information through wiretaps, the NSA spying, in order to get this information. It's massively illegal because they never tell the person that the inception of the information came from some kind of wiretap or some kind of NSA thing. It's a secret court. They don't have to expose that information to you. You have a Stasi in the United States, and they cover it up with the fig leaf of a FISA warrant. And I agree with you. They probably have these secret programs where they're spying on American citizens in the same way that they were spying on the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, we know they do. Look at the prison program.
Yeah,
but, speaking of Bill Binney, look at what he did in the NSA. He had the Thin Thread project, where he was trying to create a surveillance program with more privacy rights for U.S. citizens.
It was more specific.
But oddly enough, that program was scrapped.
Yeah, they didn't want that.
3 weeks before 9/11. What the fuck are the odds of that?
Yeah, they didn't want that program. They didn't want that. They didn't want that. It was like, no, this is too good.
Yeah, and after that, there were government raids, charges of espionage, and President Bush cracked down on whistleblowers and leaks. What are the odds of that?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, so amazing. That's what that's what I want to talk about, is that we're not the good guys. The intelligence agencies are not the good guys, and we've been working with the UK and France, Australia, New Zealand, all of these other places secretly for years and years and years to spy on literally Russia. We've been in this Cold War for the instant we stopped fighting the Nazis, we started fighting Russia
Cold
again.
War, that's right.
Yeah, it never stopped. And the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, I don't know if I came in late to your stream, but Porton Down, were you talking about that earlier?
Yeah, I was talking about Porton Down. So I mentioned that the UK was experimenting on its own citizens. Like at one point, even using the London Tube for these chemical attacks. Some of the people who they were experimenting on was talking about birth defects, and the military is like, oh, it's harmless. And they were like, well, wait a minute, explain yourself. You were having these experiments on us privately, secretly, in mass. Like in some cases, they were experimenting with the military themselves using nerve agents, meaning they were getting people in the military
Unwittingly, they were doing this.
Right,
they were not
on
telling
human
these
beings.
soldiers that they were going to be poisoned for years and years.
Yes.
You know, there's one case where they're rubbing sarin on somebody, liquid sarin on somebody's arm.
Yeah.
And this person later died. And even if they're consenting to do this because they're a good soldier, they have no idea that they're going to die from a nerve agent, you know?
They were using
and what
thousands.
are the odds that Porton Down is just a few miles from Salisbury
What are
where
the
this
odds?
poison attack happened
I'm sure
with
it was
somebody who was an ex-Russian spy?
I'm sure it was a
What are the
complete
odds?
coincidence. We can completely trust Theresa May to come down with the information and be completely honest and forthright with what's being said. I mean, come on. Like, they've been blaming Russia for everything in the United States. It makes me extremely skeptical that they come up with this thing of all of a sudden Russia did it and then pivot immediately from Russia did it without an investigation, by the way. Like, pivot.
I want to know, where are the skeptics? Where are the people, you know, obviously besides you, Jamal, who are asking about Porton Down, who are asking about these spy agencies?
I am curious
Why
myself.
is our media portraying this like it's not completely suspicious that Porton Down is nearly in the same damn town where they create nerve agents?
And beyond that, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Like, you would think that the media would say, if the government has done something once where they either was massively incompetent or fucked up royally or just lied outright, then we should be somewhat skeptical from the perspective of what's taking place from the government. I mean, what's coming out of the government.
Well, what about 2 times? What about Assad gassing his own people, and
Again,
how
yeah,
Mattis
another
just
one.
came out a few weeks ago saying that there was no evidence that Assad gassed his own
at
people.
all. And
we
that
could
was-
go so far back with the Gulf of Tonkin, as you mentioned so often.
Yes.
Like, how many times are we going to go through this? And now we have information, literally all the information in the world in our pockets. We all have smartphones where we can look this information up. And your average person knows that these things are false. We know about MK Ultra. We know about COINTELPRO. We know that our government are not always the good guys.
Yeah.
So why is it mainstream media still pushing this, trying to convince people? Who are they trying to convince?
It always takes perspective as if whatever the government is doing is right and whatever the government says is right. They're stenographers. Like, this idea of investigative journalism of, well, wait a minute, you burned us the first time with this. We're not going to allow you to burn us again, and we're going to be somewhat skeptical. That seems to be the most rational point of view in the world. And yet, that's never the point of view that they take. That's never the point of view they take. So,
I mean, who really believes this anymore? I would say the majority of people in America don't believe the conspiracy theory or believe in a conspiracy theory when it comes to, like, the JFK assassination or MK Ultra, or like, we know that these things did not happen the way that the government told us.
Yeah, the magic bullet theory. I mean, ultimately, the government went with the magic bullet theory. Like, the bullet stopped in midair and went backwards.
Is not really this big, bad, scary guy anymore. Like, this is not the time where children hide under their desks. Like, when I think of Russia, I think of vodka and, like, bears on unicycles. I don't really, I'm not scared when I think of Russia.
They're trying. I mean, do you remember George Bush? I'm going to have to show that clip one day. Where George Bush was talking and trying to get us into the Iraq War. The first George Bush. And he's, like, calling him Hitler, saying that he's going to take over the world and all this other stuff. Like, he's using this hyperbolic language about how Saddam Hussein is this magnificent big guy who's a threat to Hitler. He's like the Nazis, and like, he's flipping out in the speech. And you're like,
there's always
are you
a big
talking
bad.
about the same person Saddam Hussein? Is that the guy you're talking about? I mean, they're doing this with Russia. We spent $80 billion. We upped our military budget by $80 billion. We already spent like $1 trillion. Do you know that $80 billion is more than what Russia spends for their entire military?
Yeah. You know, I would say after Iraq, that the average person knows not to be scared of these people anymore. You know, as Jimmy Dore says, people with kitchen knives running around. Like, we know that the U.S. is pretty much the top dog. We have nobody to be scared of, and Russia is not a threat. China is a threat. They are only a threat to U.S. global domination.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem here.
Yes.
We're not worried that they're going to attack us directly. We're worried that maybe they can start, being another power or start competing with us on a global level. And that's what really scares us.
The problem is the United States is no longer a unipolar power. Like, this is not a unipolar world, meaning we don't have carte blanche in the way that we had carte blanche before. So when we try to instigate something in Syria and we get pushback from another power, we're like, what the hell? How dare you push back on us on your border. Like, think about that. Think about how weird that sounds. Like, the media is not even critical of this. Syria is not on the border of North Carolina. Like, Syria is literally on Russia's border. Like, they're all the way in another country, in another part of the world. And the United States is asserting a right of domination on the Russian border. Like, this is so bizarre. It's so bizarre. Brianna, thank you.
Well, why are we even there anymore at that point? If we already know that
it's geopolitical
Assad didn't gas his own people, why are we there anymore?
It's geopolitical influence. That's all it is. They want Assad to leave. Geopolitical influence. They want to clean up those Russian client states. Now, at least going by what Wesley Clark said. So, thank you very much for calling in, Brianna. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good talk tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Very cool. Awesome call. Awesome call. Very cool. All right, guys. I am going to call this a day. I have another one probably coming up within 10, 15 minutes. So, I will see you guys in a few. This was an awesome chat. Thank you all for showing up. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Oh, by the way, let me check, make sure. Oh, Bernard Foster and Jim Hayden. Thank you, guys. I try to check now. I always try to check. So, thank you for the super cash. You guys are absolutely appreciated. Bernard Foster, Jim Hayden, and everyone else for supporting the show. Thank you very much, guys. See you in a few.